It's a small update, but I know the video is probably a billion miles long because I have a lot of stuff I watch. I don't even have 2 anime DVDs. I have a non-anime DVD and an anime DVD. First, we got The Stupids. If you've never seen this movie, it's very stupid. I like it. But this is the anime DVD collection update, I guess Blu-ray collection, and we've got Immoral Guild complete collection. There we go. Looking in the back, I see region A only, Japanese with English subtitles only. Before he can start a new venture, he must teach the newbies about adventuring. And I kind of know that it's one of those shows that I think pushes the line between pornographic and not, I suppose. And I know it's a small update, but let's get on to the next part of the video. Here's this week's anime Blu-ray collection update. Okay, so now this anime season has officially begun, and while not everything I think I'm going to watch has started, I think the vast majority of it has. It's so far, in fact, that even though I look to the side at my list to remind myself of this stuff, I'm going to have to reach over and actually do some scrolling parts way through the video because just too many series on the list. To begin with my Friday friend, we started watching the live-action Netflix One Piece. We only saw the first 2 episodes. They're an hour each. The second one's 55 minutes. But, I guess people he knows that aren't normally anime watchers are starting to watch it, and he wants to be able to talk with people about it. So that bumped it up in the priority, and I think it was for the best. And I thought it was actually pretty good. Not as good as the original anime, but it may be more approachable and more watchable. So in a lot of regards, I would actually say that the live-action One Piece is to the anime like most movies are to their books. You know, when there's a movie adaptation of a book, people will often tell you that the book is better, but they will still find, a lot of people find the movie to be actually just very watchable, very neat. I understand why people like the book, the underlying concepts, and I feel like the One Piece live action is kind of in that same place. Like, the characters aren't perfect, and I think I've got a lot to talk about with regard to Luffy, but, you know, when they first introduced him and the way he was talking, I'm like, not sure what to think about it, but kind of his excited yell, you know, it's not the same as like the English dub that I've been listening to for a billion years at this point, but I was like, actually, I really like how spirited it is, and that felt like a good, important thing. Now, I wouldn't say that I think the live-action version of Luffy is better. In fact, I would say that the anime version is still better, especially with regards to kind of the first episode of One Piece, which, how do I want to say all this? Okay, so let's begin by talking about some things that, like, didn't quite work out as well, that make the anime feel more powerful, but this live-action version not. One of those is a live-action Luffy is a little more situationally aware than anime Luffy. So, for example, he kind of looks around a bit more and takes some preemptive steps that just like something a normal person would do. But Luffy's appeal, which might not immediately grow on you when you first see him, is kind of like, he's almost like a force of nature that kind of just keeps going forward. So, like, he doesn't understand concepts such as necessarily being quiet per se. He's just like, oh, I'm interested in that thing and I'm going to talk about it and go to it. And when he first runs into Kobe, like, the first thing live action Luffy does is kind of say, don't scream, don't scream. And I feel like it's a very different characterization. It's not a bad one, but it's one of those small things where it's like, okay, this Luffy isn't quite that force of nature. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad or unwatchable. It just means that, you know, that's one of those things that didn't quite work out the same. The way he fights is, unfortunately, while it's pretty cool and very kind of roughly tumbly maybe almost fisticuffy, kinda. It does miss out a little bit in terms of, because of the way he uses his rubber powers, just calmly against a lot of common people, I guess, kind of gives you the feeling that, yeah, the Devil Fruit powers do feel like a force to be reckoned with. And unfortunately, they don't bring that out. I think they're a little too coordinated with, or a little too trying to make the fight scenes work. Which I thought worked out definitely best for Nami, just because, she's somebody that's skilled and not like bonkers out there. So having her doing some good choreographed fighting, I thought worked out. Roronoa Zoro might have been okay in that regard. I thought overall he was a very neat character. Maybe not necessarily the same, but they still needed that choreography or whatever. And Luffy's the only one where, even though his fights were really neat to watch, you didn't get that feeling of, oh man, these people are just going to be completely overwhelmed by this person with Devil Fruit powers. And, it's a miss, but it's not a death knell, I would say. Probably some of the things that would make people more iffy about it. So, like, the very first episode of One Piece, Luffy ends up on the ship, Kobe, and I might be getting his name wrong, right? So, please bear with me. Kobe's there, and he's kind of being put down and forced to work underneath what's-her-face. But the thing that makes Luffy's presence really great in the very first episode of the anime is he encourages Kobe to actually speak up against her, and Luffy kind of makes it feel great because he's sort of defending this person's dream and not forcing that person to defend their dream, so to speak. So he kind of gives some weight to Kobe's own words and his own decisions. Even if he doesn't become the most awesome person right then and there, it's a kind of magical thing about the very first episode of One Piece that really wasn't there. Kobe never spoke up to the pirate in question, so it feels like it misses a bit of that. And maybe it's because it might have made sense there because, it kind of needed to, move along, because it's moving a lot faster than the anime did, which is something that could make it a lot more approachable compared to the anime. So, like, for somebody watching a 2.5-hour movie version of a book is probably easier to spend their time on than, okay, I'm going to spend a couple of days spread out over a week or two to read this book. That could be, I think there's kind of a similar kind of comparison there, which is why I think the original one works. But, it wasn't as awesome as that first episode of One Piece, but I did feel that some of that was still in there. You kind of felt like Luffy had these uplifting things to bring to you. And so, in that regard, it kind of works out. And we got to see some of Buggy the Clown, and I thought it was actually pretty nice. I don't remember exactly what happened in the anime, but it was definitely interesting seeing a character. I'm like, wait, that character looks so familiar. Why does that character look familiar? Of course, I saw him 800 episodes ago when I watched this, but some of the people just had very distinct looks that I recognized. I've noticed that they've also introduced some of the later plot elements earlier in this season, which could be good. It means that they're moving forward at a nice rapid pace, and in that regard, it doesn't feel like I'm spending as much time rewatching the stuff I've already watched, so it's not been that bad in that regard. But I really did like the Buggy the Clown stuff. I just can't say I remember exactly how it felt compared to the original. It felt like maybe there was a little bit of, like, I hesitate to say Heath Ledger edge just because, his role as the Joker left such a big fucking cultural impact or wound or something on all of us. And I'm not sure that the actor was necessarily going for that, but definitely it's something that kind of reminded me of working out a little bit in that direction, and I think that was just fine for a live action thing, because, you know, I think there's some elements of Buggy's makeup that was a little rough around the edges, which I don't think was quite there in the sharp anime version, but I think it works out perfectly fine in terms of, you know, having a presented reality, so to speak. And yeah, if there's anything I would say didn't work out about it, it would be the how it seemed like there wasn't a lot of people around by the end of that episode, so to speak. But overall, you know, so it isn't like an exact one-to-one thing. It's definitely doing some things to kind of brush some story elements in there. The characters aren't like perfect live-action versions of their anime selves, but I don't feel like they're bastardizations. I feel like it's not as strong as the anime version, but it's a lot more approachable than it. So overall, that's probably the most thought-provoking anime I have to talk about this week. I don't know. I guess we're going to have to go through this entire fucking list to find out. But it felt like probably the most interesting one to talk about, because if you're talking about everything else, most of it is basically new stuff that started here. So we got a Core 2 of Helk Season 1, or maybe Helk only season, I don't know. So that would be episode 13. And like I said, the previous episode was about to give us more backstory and understanding of the way things are. And this episode I thought might finish and tell all of that in one, but it didn't quite. So we've still got more to go, but it's definitely an interesting setup. I kind of feel like at the end of it, we get a lot more insight into a handful of things about the world and the anime and what it's setting up that make it feel pretty good. Let me see. We got The Saint's Magic Power is Omnipotent, Season 2, Episode 1. Now, if you watch the first season, or rewatch bits and pieces of it to kind of catch up on it, and then you watch Season 2, Episode 1, kind of a description of what I did over the past couple of months, I guess, for this series, then Season 2, Episode 1 kind of began with a, holy shit, what in the world's going on? It felt like somebody darker got their hands on it, I guess. I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but it definitely gave some foreshadowing for what's going to happen in this series. That feels like, while the character designs look the same, it feels like there's a potential darker ending that it could be, or maybe not an ending, but a darker climax, ultimate battle, something like that it's leading towards. And that was kind of interesting, but I don't think that's how we should be judging Season 2 on its own, because at a minimum we should be at least saying what happened after that, which is a lot of fairly normal stuff. It felt like very calm world, but they were setting something up. I'm trying to remember what. But for the most part, you know, it didn't feel like, okay, it began Season 2 and there's just a sharp change in tone. It felt like that was a preview of a change in tone that would probably be a very natural progression of things. So in that regard, you know, interesting. Maybe not the most impressive episode 1 of this, but, you know, off to a good enough start, I think. The Eminence and Shadow, Season 2, Episode 21. Basically, it's being called Episode 21 on High Dive. And so I'm kind of going with the same labeling they're going to, but I do believe it's still being called Eminence and Shadow Season 2. I would say it was a really fun first episode. They've definitely set something up so that it's like, okay, we're not going to waste your time and you not see interesting stuff happen. But I wouldn't say the most interesting stuff that's going to be happening in this season would happen in this episode. It must be in an upcoming episode. But what was funny about this one was just Sid's reaction to it. I think his reaction to the way things started out was just hilarious. Good Eminence and Shadow funniness. And again, also setting up some good Eminence and Shadow, whatever's going to happen after this first episode. So, good first episode of the second season. Let me see. I'm giving the disgraced noble lady I rescued a crash course in naughtiness, episode 1. So I was originally not going to do this one, but there wasn't anything else coming out on Wednesday. I'm like, I've got enough time to also at least give this one a shot. And I'm kind of glad I did, because my big worry about it was that the way it's worded just kind of sounds like, I guess it sounds a little more maybe pervy rom-com, but that's not what it means by naughtiness. So sometimes the word naughty can be used to kind of refer to naughty, the sexy kind. But in this case, they're actually referring to naughtiness more like a Santa Claus sort of way, almost. But maybe not even that kind of naughty, because I guess the idea is said a disgraced noble lady is basically so non-indulgent that when she was given free time, she didn't know what else to do, so she started counting the grains of wood on the floor. And the main character's like, you need to learn how to enjoy yourself. And so naughtiness in this case doesn't even necessarily mean naughty, maybe a little bit indulgent, but, eat some snacks because they seem like they'd be tasty. Go outside and take a nap, even though you're not awake doing something you need to do or something like that. So it feels like it could be interesting. I can definitely give it more than one episode. There just might be something about it that's a little off. I guess it's that he's spending a lot of money, it feels like, and it's like, it hasn't established that he's like some secretly super rich person per se, and he might be, might not be, and it's really hard to say what it's necessarily going to do from here, but really where it goes from that first episode is kind of the interesting point. But, as a show that sort of sets itself like that, it doesn't feel like it has a good end goal per se. So we'll just have to see what comes after this. My Daughter Left the Nest and Returned an S-Rank Adventurer, episode 2. So I mentioned episode 1, I wasn't a big fan of it. It wasn't bad, it just didn't do anything to let me know, okay, what kind of show am I about to watch? And I felt like it kind of had these two conflicting premises, and it didn't commit to either. And so at the end of the first episode, I'm like, okay, so I just feel like all I've done is watched the first episode and okay, I know the premise of the show, but I already knew the premise of the show based on the title of it, let alone the description of it. Episode 2 did a better job. Where, so if your hope was to see the daughter doing cool S-rank stuff, well, the first episode kind of established you shouldn't have that expectation, and I feel like the second episode stayed on course, but the interesting stuff was kind of the after effects of stuff she'd done on our father character. I'd like to say main character just because, the title it's describing her, but it's clearly being told from his perspective. And, I could kind of go either way with which one the show was about, and maybe it's about them both, and episode 2 is just a stepping point. But I thought, again, the after effects from things that happened in the first episode focused more on him and kind of not like daily, oh, this happened this day and that happened that day, but kind of more like the narrative of what's happening to him because of that is entertaining and interesting, and things about that I'm not sure if we knew what to think about from the first episode, but this one's like, okay, interesting. So definitely curious to see more of that. It could easily fall off a cliff, but definitely a much better episode 2, I would say. Rurouni Kenshin 2023, episode 14. Nice episode. Yeah, I'm trying to think if I have anything to really comment on, but for some reason, for Rurouni Kenshin, I keep blanking, mostly because I think I want to compare it to the first series, but I can't because I don't remember the first series in that much detail. So all I can say is it was an entertaining episode, I think. Good for Rurouni Kenshin material. Let's see. The Rising of the Shield Hero, Season 3, Episode 1. I wish I could say it was off to a better start than Season 2, but I don't remember what Season 2, Episode 1 specifically did. I do know Season 2 was overall weak, and there's a multitude of reasons for those. Part of it is it lost some of its steam of the core emotional, oh, now I'm pissed, I'm going to watch the shit out of this show, that, the first season did to drive us there. But then it felt like it tried to reproduce that in cheap ways that didn't feel like they made sense. The show just told us, oh yes, this person now has the ability to do this for some reason, even though it doesn't make sense that they should be able to do that. So it's like Season 2 was just confusing, and then it got even worse as it kind of went. It was also told a little quickly, where it's like, okay, we're going to throw Raphtalia in this prison that nobody can break out. And she's like, it's been 15 seconds, I'm bored already, let's break out of here. And they break out effortlessly. So, Season 2 kind of had a lot of things that didn't work for it. Season 3, I would say a couple of things that it has done that are improved over Season 2. First of all, it's once again dealing a little bit with the dark underbelly of the society, which was an important factor in the first one. It's sort of like, don't know what to think about this, but I understand exactly why the character is going here. And I feel like Season 3 is exploring a little bit of that again. It doesn't have that rage driving it, but it's definitely, I think, a better place for it to be. Similar to how... So if there's one thing about The Force Awakens that kind of gave people a false hope for the sequel trilogy, it was that it did seem to remember what fans said. Star Wars is a used universe, so it shouldn't be all these sparkly new stuff, which the prequel trilogy did. It should be scum and bounty hunters and bars on the edge of the frontier. That rogue-like element needs to be present. And, it felt like, Force Awakens kind of felt like it was promising because it remembered some of that. For all of its flaws, the only problem was the flaws just became more. Now, Rising of the Shield Hero Season 3 doesn't feel like it's just that yet, but it's definitely a thing where it's like, I feel like that's an important element to the show. And the other one is, instead of throwing our main character into a completely another world, he's back in the world that he's been adventuring in from the beginning. And so we're kind of seeing more reasonable exploration of stuff that feels more meaningful and less meandery and stuff, which is unfortunate because plenty of the characters from Season 2 were very interesting, but something about the execution just wasn't there. So, Season 3 off to a good start, but we'll have to see how it continues. Goblin Slayer, Season 2, Episode 1. I'd say fine start. Not as mind-blowingly... I don't know how you would call that first episode. I want to call it awesome, but at the same time, it's so ridiculously over the top that I think it turned some people off of it. The whole goblins having their way with people and their merciless torture and all that stuff, and that's horrible stuff. And that's not talked about as much in Goblin Slayer Season 2, Episode 1, but it is kind of a reintroduction to things and a sign of, I guess, the sort of forward direction of it, which is they've introduced a new character who's a mage, which is actually an interesting, he feels different than any of the other characters in Goblin Slayer's friend group at the moment. But the thing that makes him different, and not just, oh yes, and suddenly mages, okay, and he has a very different motivation from any other people. His motivation seems on the surface to be most like Goblin Slayer's itself, which, kind of makes us curious, okay, where is it going to go? Because, I don't know, Season 2, Episode 1 didn't really tell us where it's going to go, but at least set up, I guess something that's like, okay, we're starting back up again, we're kind of getting you introduced back into things. let's see where it goes from here, because it's promising, even if it's kind of hard to tell, I guess, how it's going to go, per se. But I feel like episode 2 will give you a good feeling. We'll have to see. The Kingdoms of Ruin, episode 1. So, this one I thought was kind of an iffy first episode. The reason kind of iffy is just because it feels like its reasoning for the setup is a little shallow or convenient, so to speak. A sort of, oh, witches were powerful, but they were there to protect people, or normal humans, and humans, I guess, decided to just turn into Nazis about it for some reason. It feels like it's describing too much. It's just assuming that it's just something that just sort of happens, and it didn't really give anything to make us feel like, oh yeah, some people were just mistreated by witches, or witches didn't mistreat people, but they looked down on people, or something like that. They didn't give us anything. But that doesn't necessarily mean it wasn't a successful first episode. If anything, I'd say it's a weak first episode just because it relied too much on people behaving in ways that's like, okay, yes, people would behave that way if we were given a reason to believe that they would act that way, but this show didn't give us that. But it does feel like it's a really good setup for, oh man, this man is pissed and he's gonna fucking Doomslayer on all their asses once episode 2 comes out, maybe. And if they do that, then I'd be looking really forward to it. But we have to see. So again, mix of a first episode. Reign of the Seven Spellblades, episode 14. I think that's correct. I'm trusting in my notes that I updated stuff as I went. It's showing more of some of the, I think, the problems with Reign of the Seven Spellblades, but it's the stuff that's already been up to this point. If you've been watching it, you probably enjoy it. And that main problem is, while they are on this, they do have something that they're very specifically attempting to try to do, the show seems to keep getting a little distracted from it. But it did do stuff at the very end that is definitely going to force what I would have thought would have gotten resolved 2 episodes ago to finally go into more direct confrontation. So it's okay, but it's got its flaws. Frieren, Beyond Journey's End, I watched episodes 3 through 5, so I thought it said that it was going to jump 4 more episodes this week, but it only dropped 1 more episode, so I think I'm all caught up now, and it's been a nice episodes 3 through 5. I think it's possible we're seeing something that may be something sort of like an end goal for the show that could turn out to be something really beautiful, but even if it's not going to be really beautiful, it is pretty beautiful along the way. There's a kind of somberness to it, but yeah, I think it's nice. I think it's barely working for its premise. The premise being, of course, that our main titular character she lives so long that it's like, okay, yeah, she doesn't have the same concept of time as everybody else. And to a certain degree, I could understand that working, but I also didn't feel like it necessarily was doing the, it was necessarily setting it up to be the right way. So, for example, she may be like so long-lived that's like, it's just a 10-year journey. What's 10 years to my life? But, I don't think most people live their day-to-day lives thinking, oh, yeah, I could go all the way there. It's just going to be an entire year of my life. Because even if it's an entire year of our life, and even if our life is longer than, say, a mouse, tiny mouse, which I think they have pretty short lives, it trying to walk from one end of the United States to the other may be an impossibly daunting task. But the truth of the matter is, I don't think most people do that, not because they live longer than mice, but because to them it's like, it's still time investment, and the things that you have to do day to day compared to that sort of thing, it's a long time. So to me, it would mean, because this elf girl still eats on a daily basis, sleeps on a daily basis, etc. Probably she has to drink fluids about as often as your average human does. I don't know, maybe they could make an argument that she eats less and drinks less or something. But the fact that she still has to have that kind of maintenance would make that period of time still take forever and not seem like something that's... Because it's not relative to your life that you do stuff, it's relative to what you're doing on your day-to-day that something would seem long. And in that regard, the fundamental premise of the show feels like it could be off. With, you know, the real exception to that kind of idea being that, okay, as a long-lived species, maybe psychologically speaking, they have different ways of handling stuff. And that causes... And I feel like the reason the show works is because it does almost feel like it's leaning a little bit more in that direction. Like, in order to be a long-lived creature, eventually you just kind of say, what's another 10 years? As opposed to, it's only 10 years, I'll just do it in 10 years, it's fine. So, overall, you know, it's easy to kind of criticize, but fortunately it doesn't seem to be leaning too heavily in the wrong direction. So it's just overall pretty fine. Now here's the part where I have to scroll down because I only got through the Friday stuff, and then there's Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And if y'all been paying attention, you know there's a shit ton of stuff. So Ragnar Crimson episode 2. I think it's a fine episode 2. Like I said, I really liked the first episode and what it set up. There's a possibility that what episode 2 did maybe backtracked a little bit on some of what was good about the first episode, but only some of it. Still has the most important thing there, I guess. It's an important premise, and showed us more stuff, more setup, more of an idea of what it's supposed to be. And I think for most of us, the only question is, will the other stuff that was really neat in the first episode continue to play an important part? Because I feel like I want it to. And I don't know how to describe too much of what that is without spoiling stuff that I don't want to spoil. But overall, I thought, episode 2 set up some more interesting world building, I guess, if you could call it that. Let me see. The Vexations of a Shut-In Vampire Princess, episode 1. This is one where I'm a little more on the fence on. It's not necessarily a bad show, but I guess I'm trying to decide what it wants maybe to be the big takeaway point. It could be something like the fact that the princess is having to put up a stoic front when out, but kind of having to be this cute shut-in when not out in front of everybody. That could be a drive possibly for people. One of the things that makes it a little weak for me is that it does seem to be a little bit leaning on, she has to pretend that she's strong to all these people, and I'm not a big fan of that kind of concept per se. So I might give it another episode just to see if it sticks a little bit better. We'll have to see, because my Saturdays are motherfucking packed. But it might be one of the weaker ones that I watched on Saturday. Weaker, not necessarily meaning bad, but weaker as in, like, it didn't hold me as strong. Let's see. The Faraway Paladin, Season 2, Episode 1. Now, let's see. What exactly happened in this episode? They established that... Okay, yeah. It was a kind of neat, sort of laid-back episode. A very Faraway Paladin sort of pacing. Maybe not necessarily the highest highs of Faraway Paladin, but the original first season wasn't highest high for all of it either. It was a lot of just kind of neat, sort of seeing what was going on sort of stuff. And I'm trying to think if I can describe what happened in this episode without spoiling it, and I don't think I could. I just thought it was neat. Nothing that I would say is too exciting, and if you thought Season 1 was boring but you're hoping Season 2 would be better, well, this isn't the episode to convince you of that, I think. Maybe for some people, but I'm not sure. So, we'll have to see what more Season 2 has to bring. Buta Reba, the story of a man turned into a pig. Well, actually, if there's anything that was maybe the weakest Saturday, maybe this one could be a contender for Vexations. I would say the biggest problem with it is the main character's like, I've been turned into a pig, and sometimes he's like, treat me like a pig, spank me, sorts of stuff. And I guess, just as somebody that isn't really into that, I guess, it's not much of a thing. And while that doesn't seem to be the only thing the show has going for it, it almost feels like they want that to be a strong component of it. So I'll have to see where it continues. I guess it's given a bit of a direction, and we'll have to see. But otherwise, it's strange. I guess the relationship between the main character and the girl is strange. It felt a little more convincing as it went. But, you know, a very strange first episode. I'll have to give it another shot. I Shall Survive Using Potions, episode 1. Another very strange episode 1. But in some ways also refreshing. So the biggest problem I kind of had with it is the main character is like, oh, I guess I'm being conveniently set up in order to resurrect in this world, and I'll try to set up OP abilities using my understanding without trying to actually understand things ahead of time and during time, and only after time kind of figuring out, oh, okay, I made assumptions. It's like, why didn't you double check some of these assumptions? You for example, they took a look at how much would it cost to stay a night at the end. It's like, okay, I have to sell these potions at least for this amount, and not how much do potions normally sell for? What kind of potions normally are there? What do potions normally do? It's sort of like the sorts of things where you're like, if this person was supposed to be seeming like they were trying to be prepared and trying to do something smart, they seem to be a little unprepared and maybe not that smart. But I think maybe is a more key word there, because it feels like it's really just a poor execution on the part of the show itself. But then it got kind of interesting, sort of the way it approached things closer to the end of the episode. I'm not sure how to really describe it, but it was just like, okay, at least some of this stuff is interesting and good ideas. Like, for a show which set these things up where it's just like, okay, so I can already take a guess that her potions are more OP than anybody is expecting because they don't have potions that do that. So, and nobody's going to buy her potions immediately, etc., etc. You can guess all that stuff. But then there's other parts where it's just like, okay, well, what's she going to do in this situation? Oh, why is she doing this? And it was later I'm like, oh, that's what she's doing. Of course. So there's a little bit of, again, refreshing thought in there, which is followed up by some other interesting stuff. But we'll have to see where it goes from there, I think. Again, I think I've mentioned a couple of other first episodes. I wouldn't call this one a weak one so much as a confusing one. It's demonstrated that it's got some clever ideas going on. And I guess we just have to see where it goes from episode 1. Tearmoon Empire, episode 1. I thought it was pretty good. So there's elements of it that remind me of a lot of the other villainous shows we saw, where usually for those, the main character is the villainous of the story, but somebody isekai'd into them, and then them as the villainous kind of realizes it. And so this feels like it removed that isekai element from it. And so it has that same sort of personality shift that comes from some of these realizations coming up, I guess. But it was still a very, very dark beginning with a very flashing back to it still, so it's kind of like it still has this dark element to it that's kind of feels like it's maybe going to propel it to go forward in ways that are not like those stereotypical villainous shows. excuse me, a little hiccup burps there. So I thought it was a decent first episode. It's interesting because this one is similar to Ragnar Crimson in that because of the fundamental premise, you know what end goal these shows have, which kind of gives you a forward direction and makes them. It makes it easier for you to determine whether or not you're going to want to watch it. So, and that's not the only one like this either. There's another one that I'll be talking about later. But overall, I feel like I kind of want to see where it's going and how it starts executing things because it was off to a pretty good start, I'd say. Spy Family. Now, this is Season 2, Episode 26. Or just Episode 26, however you want to call it. I would say it was just a fun little episode. Nothing that's too mind-bogglingly enormous for Spy Family stuff. Not something that's just like, let's start this season off with a huge bang. No, instead this was, let's start this off with a reminder of this show just kind of has its own cute, interesting, simple little personality. And it's definitely an Anya Strong episode. But the Yor and Twilight stuff are definitely, or Yor and Lloyd, those are definitely funny too. Hair guy, he was pretty funny too. He had some funny moments. So, you know, overall, it was a good reintroduction to it. Just a slow reintroduction, not a bam, let's get back into this. So I'm definitely curious to see where it's going to go from here. I do believe the preview suggested that the next episode is another school life one. So we'll have to see how it goes. And then the final anime for Saturday, A Returner's Magic Should Be Special, Episode 1, which is like Ragnar Crimson and Tearmoon Empire in that it's another one of those, oh yeah, something happened in the future and now the person's in the past or the power's in the past or whatever. It's like, okay, now we know which direction this anime is going. And I would say it's off to a good start. I think the main problem is we don't know too well what I guess what kind of a show it's going to be. So like episode 1 ended at a place where it's like, okay, well we haven't seen what the implications of our character going back in time are. Like Ragnar Crimson's like, okay, this is about his power traveled back in time essentially, and now present him is as powerful as his ridiculously overpowered future self. And so Ragnar Crimson sets that up, and you kind of understand, okay, that's what it's going to be. And Tearmoon Empire, she's just I say a plain ordinary girl, but I guess that just means from a superpower perspective, she's just a princess with nothing else really to note. So in that one you kind of know, okay, this is a show where it's what she says, what she learns, what she does, who she talks to, that's what that show's about. A Returner's Magic Should Be Special, we don't know yet. Episode 1 ended at a place just before would have shown us, okay, does he know more about this stuff because he inherited future knowledge? Did he inherit powers from his future self? We have absolutely no idea. I don't even think we understand the rules of that world yet. So, you know, I think it was a good setup because it's like, I think it's leaning a little heavily on the fact that we know which direction is forward in this anime to keep people interested, but we definitely need to see what it's going to do for episode 2. Don't worry, 8 more to go. Berserk of Gluttony, episode 2. Episode 1 I mentioned set up some interesting stuff. Episode 2, I guess, sort of took a break from what had been set up at the very end of that episode to kind of continue setting up some of the, okay, here's our character's world and how his world is changing, but then kind of giving us more information on what's going on with the anime. And I guess it was an okay episode too. trying to think if we're expecting more from it. Shangri-La Frontier, episode 2. I'd say, compared to the first episodes, episode 2 keeps things at about the same. You know, there's interesting things that happen. If there's one thing that episode 2 does that's a little bit better, it starts introducing other characters to our main character so that we can eventually start seeing better how he's measuring up. And in this case, it's just tiny little bits. But, you know, it was kind of interesting. But I feel like the show is missing out on... We don't have a good feeling of other people, I guess, reacting to whatever our main character is doing. We, at best, seem to get hints of that. But, you know... Yeah, it's fine. I'll watch episode 3 still. I'm not sure if it's bad enough to say that I would drop it, but I would just say it feels like, as while it's doing interesting stuff, yeah, I guess I'm waiting for it to give me something a little bit more, which doesn't necessarily mean it has to give me that, but I would definitely want to see more to say, oh yeah, this one is a definite hook, yeah. The next one, I was originally thinking I wasn't going to watch, but it's The 100 Girlfriends Who Really, 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 Really Love You, episode 1. And part of the reason I wasn't going to watch it is rom-com. It's like, it's probably fine. I'm not sure if I feel terribly heavy on the romantic side, per se. You know, there's a part of me that's, you know, watching anime for... Maybe not even escapism is quite the right word. It could be more like to even, like, not think about stuff related to our world. But I saw people commenting on it. They were apparently really excited to see it, so I decided to give it a shot. And interestingly enough, I would compare it kind of favorably to The World God Only Knows. And that one I would say was definitely a little more romantic because, you know, the entire premise is that the main character is romanticizing girls. You know, he's supposed to make them fall in love with him so that he can, you know, eject the spirits out of them, and then what's-her-face can recollect them again. This one isn't quite that. And in fact, the fundamental premise kind of creeped me out a little bit. In particular, it's like, oh yes, it's about soulmates. And the love of God says, okay, yes, and soulmates know that they meet their soulmates because they get this shock when they first see each other. And I'm like, show, you seem to be describing something in real life that wouldn't be soulmateism. It doesn't mean it's not soulmate, but it usually means people who get that rush of... hormones that are trying to encourage people to get into relationships. And the reason that one gives me shivers is just because, you know, you do have some people that mistake that for love. And you get the even bigger problem of when people do kind of attach because, oh, I have to be attached to this person because they make me feel lightheaded and swooned and stuff. It's like, the danger of that is what happens when those hormones run out. Because humans aren't exactly pair bonding creatures. I know we like to try to set up a society sort of like we are, but my understanding of the biological evidence is we're not one way or the other. We're somewhere in between. And really, our hormone stuff is counter to the entire idea, I think, of being long-term partners. Because it's my understanding that the more reason people have these intense initial bonds is because if you're living in a group of people, you know, a little tribe, you know, people might work together to make a kid, but you want to give that kid enough time to reach enough maturity to not instantly die, basically. And it, you know, a lot of that doesn't help that humans give birth prematurely. And this isn't premature for humans. This is just premature compared to other animals in the animal kingdom. You know, bar, of course, like kangaroos, which, you know, birth them when they're like embryos and they crawl into the pouch, and that's like pretty incredible. But humans, it's more like, okay, we have to get this baby human, out of the mother before its head is too big to fit through the pelvis. And we have to worry about that when most other animals don't, or not animals, animals don't have to, just because we're bipedal, and that means our pelvises are shaped differently in order to help us stand upright, which most animals are not designed to do, and thus most animals don't have to contend with this weird contradiction of biological necessities. And, you know, the entire point is, I feel really worried about it, but fortunately for the show, that just seems to be a setup for the premise, and it's not actually doing that. So it only introduced 2 of the 100 girls. I don't know how quickly it introduces girls, but the way the girls behaved was funny given the premise. The way our main character behaved in response to that was, I found it pretty I think people more into romantic comedies would probably enjoy it a lot. But kind of one of his, like 95% of his approach to it, after it got set up, I would say that would be probably what's like, okay, well, that's kind of nice too. So it's, I don't know if I would call it smart, but it was definitely very, a good first episode, I would say. I'm definitely curious to see more what it's going to do. If there were anything I regretted about the first episode, it would have been that I would have preferred it if he talked to them and said, yeah, I talked to a love god, and before we go forward with this, I gotta warn y'all that apparently there's gonna be 100 of you. Then it feels like when they accept, okay, yeah, you're suggesting this, you know, then it feels even more genuine. But as it is right now, it feels like he kind of knows this, but he's not thinking about it for some stupid reason. So it almost feels like it loses a little bit of its edge to a certain degree. Oh, and if he follows it up with, and it's also my understanding that if I don't get together with absolutely every single one of you, then the ones I don't get together with are going to die from using up all your luck in life. And I understand exactly why they didn't explain that, because it just sounds weird. So you could say the show's weird, but it's surprisingly effective. Dark Gathering, episode 14. I guess an okay entertaining episode. It had some creepiness to it. I'm not sure if I feel as creeped out watching some of it. Part of that could just be my age, but you know, it's harder for animations in general to be scary per se. But, you know, in terms of the stuff that's happening and it not being a one-trick pony, I felt like it was pretty good. But unfortunately, it's still kind of continuing on this one sub-story arc that it's going on. So, I've got more to see. The Demon Sword Master of Excalibur Academy, episode 2. Still kind of scratching my head trying to understand what this show intends to be. But at a minimum, there are at least a couple of interesting parts in this episode 2, I would say. But overall, I would say that it's hard to tell what I'm going to think about this show long term, because I'm already not a fan of the premise of, oh, well, I'm super ridiculously powerful, but I need to keep it a secret and pretend I'm not. To me, it's just uncomfortable to watch shows like that where a character has to go on with a lie. And this one hasn't shown what that means yet. And so that's why when episode 3 happens, I'm hoping that I'll get a better idea. This may be an anime where it follows the 3-episode rule pretty precisely. Or it's a bad 3rd episode and you still have no idea, in which case maybe it's not a bad 3rd episode because it means, okay, I guess I have a vague idea of what this show might be doing, but it might be doing it slow. We'll have to see what episode 3 brings to us. A playthrough of a certain dude's VR MMO Life, episode 2. I'd say it's maybe an okay episode. It's really hard to tell if there's some far destination it's going for. Maybe there's a direction where our main character is like, you know, utilizing some things that are just not normally being considered, and I guess we get to see some of that build up. If that's what it's going to do through the whole series, it's kind of hard to tell if it's going to be good or not, just because, you know, it could easily run out of ideas or have some ideas that are like, I'm not sure how much I agree with that, but so I guess we'll have to see. Ron Kamonohashi's Forbidden Deductions, episode 2. The deductions part of the show is actually pretty interesting, I thought. It's like, oh, that's an interesting little thing that the show constructed and reasoned out, and it's like, okay, lots of interesting deductions going on there. Again, some of the gimmick with the titular character, I'm not sure if I get. And then episode 2 introduced a bit more gimmick that's like super shadow organ. I don't know. It smells like bullshit to me. But I guess we'll have to see what kind of effect that has on the show as it goes, because it might be fine. But I'm worried that the show's trying too hard with something that it doesn't need to try too hard on. We'll find out. And then, last but not least, Dead Mount Deathplay, episode 13. Again, this is very similar to a couple of other ones where it's like, okay, it didn't begin with a bang like the very first episode did. This one's kind of easing us back into it, which is especially good because what happened at the end of the previous one was a kind of big event, even though it didn't feel like it had as much of an impact as I would have hoped, I guess. But it did establish a whole lot of stuff, and then now we're starting Core 2, and I guess it's moving forward, and I guess it'll be interesting to see where it moves forward and how it moves forward, and making sure it's, I don't know, the right balance of stuff. I know that's a weird way to say it, but I don't know. I just kind of started blanking. I just talked about, 28 fucking series? This list is goddamn long. And did you hear me say I'm going to drop any of these? Maybe 1 or 2. So, I don't know. I'm going to have to figure this all out. But I also need to wrap up this video. Y'all, have a nice week.